star. Okay. Okay. Privet, Katila, ja, ni хорошо. Because today I'm actually doing pretty well because today we have a very special guest on, and his name is PoliDice, or I used to think it was PoliDice, but thinking back, that actually was pretty a stupid thing to think about. But it's pronounced PoliDice, right?
So it's like PoliDice. So like PoliDice. So imagine that you kind of thought PoliDice, and that's not totally wrong. So it's like you were going to say political,
Yeah.
but instead of finishing the word, you just go so pola, and then dice. So PoliDice.
Yeah, that's what that's kind of, PoliDice sounds more clean, and PoliDice is kind of like how I would pronounce it if I saw your name for the first time, like when I first saw your name. But I think in the debate you had with the other guy, Non-Complete, I think he pronounced it as PoliDice. So I'm like, oh, is that how you say it?
Everyone says PoliDice. I don't care. Like, I say PoliDice. So that's like the correct way. But like people say PoliDice, so it's whatever. They can call it whatever they want.
All right. Well, I'll refer to you as PoliDice. So I guess I think a lot of most people are gonna, whoever sees this, are probably coming from your end. Like I have this honored. I feel like I'm talking to like Sargon, or like like I'm like talking to the president or something. I feel this guy
wow.
This guy's like has 18,000 subscribers, and then here's measly this plebe here who only has 1,000.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that is. And it's I mean, hey, who knows? I mean, you went from like, what was it, like a few hundred subscribers, and then you're like, hey, maybe I'll get 1,000 by August 2019, and then boom, you have like, you'll probably have 20,000 by then. It's who knows what's gonna. But it's a great honor to have you. So I think most people are going to be asking not who you are, because most people coming on here probably know who you are. They're probably like, who the hell is this guy talking to this guy? So they probably want to know who the hell I am. But I think as a courtesy, I guess the first question would be, kind of describe yourself. Kind of like, what is your kind of broad political, like, how would you like describe yourself as a person? Like, you're not sorry. Your ideology, like your political ideology, your political thoughts, and then kind of like your kind of political background, like kind of what got you to where you are. I guess that's where we could start, kind of talk about what we are in terms of politics.
So I'm a left-wing, progressive, social democratic YouTuber. As for you mentioned history, I saw one of your videos where you drew it was like a map of the United States, and then you're like, oh, I went from this state to this state in terms of.
I feel pretty honored that you watched one of my videos.
Oh yeah. So if we're doing that, we're like, it's a political compass where Seattle was like the ultra far authoritarian left, and Los Angeles is the libertarian left, and Florida is libertarian right, and Maine is the authoritarian right. Yeah. I guess that I started out in like the kind of left libertarian, I guess, Colorado or Arizona, maybe Utah, not that maybe Utah, I guess. And I basically just believed whatever my parents told me growing up, and I didn't realize that. So if somebody asked me like, oh, do you just believe what your parents believe? I would have said, oh no, of course not. I am a free thinker. But I had this epiphany in like ninth grade where I'm like, wait a second, I agree with my parents on everything. So that's when I started like really thinking for myself. And then I eventually drifted further to the right, and I became kind of like conservative libertarian-ish for about 2 years in high school. So then I was, I guess, Maryland, maybe. I was definitely like very, very right wing, maybe not so much libertarian, but and then around the time that I was graduating high school, going into college, I became more center left. So I started to kind of like reconsider a lot of the views that I had. I started learning more about economics and sociology, and I became more moderate to left. I kind of started adopting Keynesian views, and I started thinking of things more sociologically. And then about a year later, so let's say at that point I'm in Colorado, and then about a year later, I became more of like a moderate conservative John Kasich, Marco Rubio type. So then I guess you could say I was in Tennessee. And then, so for about 2 years, I was a very solid moderate Republican. So I wasn't like alt-right or anything, but I was kind of like, I was a big fan of like, Ben Shapiro, Bill Whittle. I even would watch some PragerU videos. That's embarrassing. But and then the first issue to fall for me was universal health care. With healthcare, it was like I used to think like, oh, if we just made healthcare like a super free market thing, then that would solve everything. And that if we had universal healthcare, then that would be this huge burden on the economy, and there would be all these taxes, and they would destroy everything. But the more I realized that there is already a tax in our economy, and that's the private insurance industry that's premiums, and it's costing us more than the universal healthcare system would. And then I took a class in college called healthcare economics, and that really solidified thinking of things in terms of wanting more of a universal healthcare single payer system. And then from there, a lot of other issues started falling. I remember with climate change, I used to think like, oh, it's not going to be that big of a deal, but I started to learn more and more about climate change, and it's like, okay, this is a serious thing. And then I learned about what was happening in Kansas with the tax cuts, and it's like, okay, so a lot of I kind of bought into a lot of the supply side neoclassical economic stuff, but I kind of saw that kind of fall apart too. And eventually I called myself a conservative Democrat. So that, I guess I was in.
You could maybe like West Virginia or something like that, or like Joe Manchin.
To the left of that. So I think I was kind of like more left-wing economically, but still more. I remember definitely when it came to like social issues, I was still moderate, and on some, I remember I was still like very anti SJW and stuff. And then eventually, with that, Sean and ContraPoints, and I really started opening my mind up to social justice. And one thing that really impacted me with that was race, like learning about how systemic racism really does stifle a lot of people, especially in poor minority communities, and redlining, and how we still live in a de facto segregated society. And then I think that the last issue to fall was feminism. So feminism and LGBT, or like a lot of that really solid quote unquote SJW stuff. I was like really these radical feminists and everything. But eventually I came along on that, and I started calling myself a feminist. And that was like March 20. So until like March 2018, I was still kind of holding on to some reactionary views. And then a month later, after I was like really solidly progressive, I started making PoliDice videos. So yeah, that's my political transition. And I guess in your little map thing, I went all around the place.
Yeah, well, yeah, if I think you basically know where, if you saw my video, you basically know where my political journey is. And it's a pretty wild ride. I started off as a moderate conservative, and it's like, I think the one weird thing is that we kind of we go back to like, I think what our parents kind of believed in a way, because like now a lot of the ideas that my dad had, like now I have. But I went through the entire political times. This is why I kind of like these discussions. I kind of wanted to start off because I'm like, okay, I've been everywhere. So I really wanted to know, what, like kind of what everyone thought, just kind of bring everyone on and just kind of like talk about things and just kind of get the different points of view. Cause at the end of the day, that's the best way you could, and break away from, cause the one downside of the internet is like people kind of get up in their own like echo chambers, and they kind of hear the viewpoints that like, that kind of go again, that, how do you say it? Their narrative that they have in their head, and they just like, okay, the title is like they just look and go into communities that kind of reinforce their beliefs, and they don't go out and try to see other points of view. The way I changed, and it kind of goes back to my political journey, is that these little I agreed with people a little bit, and then that's how I was able to go into their look into their other ideology. Because if I disagree with them completely, it's kind of hard to look into their whole ideology. Like, for example, I used to be like a moderate conservative, and then I became this like libertarian anarchist. Like, I think it was because of the NSA leaks in 2013 that made me that. And again, I mean, also I was like a 13, 14-year-old teenager here, so you know, that might have been something. Fuck the government, but you know, I really so I was like a libertarian anarchist for a little bit, and then I kind of I was in a dark point in my life where I started moving toward atheism. I kind of broke away from my faith, and a lot of the atheist channels were kind of like were like left wing channels. And the thing with them is that, you know, I agree with them on foreign policy, I agree with them on social issues, and but then they also talked about like economics. And the one thing I kind of in my entire kind of life is kind of this anti-elitist kind of kind of the established status quo. I don't really like I kind of bought into that the rich corporations and the rich people were kind of also screwing us, and not just the government. So I kind of bought into the left wing framework there, and then I kind of bought it. And then it wasn't until Bernie Sanders came around that I actually finally got someone who and you know now you know I the one thing I say about Sanders is that he actually made me go into the political process. Like that was kind of his goal. And I kind of that's how I kind of first of all got into it. But I kind of I could put into words the economic populism of the left, and I kind of saw the right wing as just not being this populist, because, you know, I kind of there was just but then there was also, and then I was kind of like a Bernie Sanders social democrat. I kind of like where you are at the moment, though I was also an anti-social justice warrior, and the reason why I didn't become full on like in that is because, you know, there was a lot of like, oh, Bernie's a racist because he doesn't focus on minority issues, and that kind of alienated me in the way. So I'm like, okay, like I'm like a left wing person, but I'm not like a far left person who's like this crazy social justice warrior. And then I got attached to Donald Trump after I learned that Hillary fucked over the election for Bernie, and I kind of saw that. I'm like, okay, Hillary needs to, you know, she's the personification of everything I hate, the elites of both for the government and the corporations and everything. And I just and Donald Trump kind of was symbolizing himself as like this anti-establishment character. So I really bought into it. And because I agreed with what got me, it wasn't like, you know, right-wing supply. I'm like, okay, I'm a Bernie Sanders social democrat, but there's some economic right-wing populists who are also that. So I looked into their ideas, and that's when I bought into like nationalism and traditionalism, and, you know, stuff like, you know, the kind of the alt-right and a little bit like that. And I flirted with them for a little bit, but then after Trump was elected and I realized, hey, he's not actually going to transform anything, he's just another GOP president, I kind of like, okay, you know, so I started like moderating all my views, and now I've kind of become, I mean, I want to say I'm a centrist, but I kind of consider, I think I'm a right-wing person, because the thing is, because I think this is like where we could bring our discussion is like the left and the right, like what does that even mean? And if you seem like you're in college, you said if I remember correctly, you studied like kind of like, was it like political science and like stuff like that, right?
So I was an economics major, a political science minor, and I took classes in sociology and history.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I love history. It's one of my favorite. As you can see, I was playing Empire Total War earlier. Yeah. I really, yeah, that's not, yeah. So yeah, I'm by the way, guys, I'm kind of getting ready for PoliDice to kick my ass here. This is my first time debating, and he's this college educated.
It's my second time debating, so don't sell yourself short.
Oh, I mean, you're pretty good. But so if I had to consider myself what I am, the thing is that, like, you know, like I'm an environmentalist. You know, I love. This is why you know, I'm an environmentalist. I believe in, like, you know, Keynesian economics, but I also believe in like but the thing that makes me right wing is not that there should be government intervention, because at least like despite our differences here, I think we could all agree the most cancerous thing, the most cancerous political spectrum is this like autistic, like, oh, on like this one, I've seen this this thing go around. It's like on one side is communism and fascism. That's if you go down that road, that's left wing. And if you go down all the way to the right wing, that's anarchism. And then that's the political spectrum. Like, goddamn, that's the most stupidest, like I think, spectrum in the entire damn world. And if you understand, that's kind of like why a lot of boomer conservatives kind of label everyone they don't like as like communists and fascists and everything. Once you understand their mindset, you kind of understand where they're coming from. But what made me right wing is not that what made me, I think, because I think the best way I could describe myself is kind of economically Keynesian, socially moderate, and culturally conservative, which is kind of like you know how a lot of people are like, oh, I'm socially liberal but economically conservative. I like flip it on its head. It's like the opposite kind of. So I think and the way because I believe in traditional social structures, and I kind of I believe in social hierarchy and the idea that people are fundamentally unequal and kind of left to their own devices are there needs to be traditional social more like responsibilities and duties and structures in place in the form of a strong government in order to make sure humans that recognize human nature and make sure and kind of puts policy in place to make them able to live a prosperous life. And so it's like, okay, people are different. There's people are kind of in nature they have the tendency to be violent, and there's certain things that happen with humans that we need to that if we these traditional structures that we put in place are there to mold them into becoming better people. And that's why I kind of like, okay, well, because that's the typical thing. So right wing and left wing kind of was purposed from the French Revolution. The right wing were mostly for like the monarchy, the left wing were for overthrowing it. And if I could describe the left and right wing, it would be kind of based on social structures. Kind of like how much do you want it to be more egalitarian, or how much do you want it to be more hierarchical? That's why you could say the far left idea is like communism, which is like a classless, moneyless society, just everyone's equal. And then on the right wing is a very strict authoritarian, like fascism, where there's like this very strict hierarchy. And that's why I think my tendency toward kind of traditional structures and kind of like, I believe in families, the fundamental pillar of kind of says, I believe in the traditional not like I believe family is like a cornerstone of society. I believe in nation and nationalism. So my kind of tendency towards those makes me a right wing, but it's also kind of like, well, I'm also an environmentalist and someone on the left on that Keynesian. So it's kind of like a weird thing. I'm not sure how I would describe myself. Sorry for the rambling.
No, you're fine. I rambled too. As for your views, I would definitely describe you, or at least what I would call populist. So I remember for a long time I'd ask myself, that you have people on the left and then you have people on the right, but then you have people who are libertarian, where they borrow the more economic views of the right and the more social views of the left.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a long time, I was wondering, oh, what's the opposite of that? And the word that I generally use is populist. Although populist, like Bernie Sanders is a populist, that doesn't mean that he's the opposite of libertarian or that he has right-wing views. But I would say that Bernie Sanders is a left-wing populist and Trump is a right-wing populist. But if somebody is just a populist, when I hear populist, I think the opposite. So they have more conservative social views and more liberal or progressive economic views. But there is no standardized word for that, so I just kind of use populist as the default term.
Yeah, the way I think I see it, the way in at least liberal democratic societies is that when a left-wing populist gets elected, it's usually for economical reasons. It's like the people say, okay, we're being screwed over. There's a Great Depression or something, and we need government interference to help I'm unemployed. I have no money. I need an activist government to help me, with economics. As in when a right-wing populist gets in power, it's usually because the people feel they're unsafe, or they feel like there's like things are like, there's not an orderly thing. So if you could, one thing that you could describe right-wing people as is like they're in favor of order and kind of like structure and authority. and they would say, so like for example, when there was a huge European migrant crisis, there's they elected a bunch of right wing populist governments in Europe. And then, for example, in Brazil, they have it's so astonishing. Apparently, there's like 65,000 people die from murders. It's like this very crime-ridden society, and they just recently had this huge corruption scandal with their previous leaders. So it's like, okay, our government's corrupt. We have crime everywhere. We have to elect a right-wing person in power. So I think that's kind of like where when a right-wing populist or a left-wing populist comes in power, those are kind of when they come into play. That's like when they come in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that you're definitely correct with that analysis. So if you have somebody who's like an average Joe voter, the average Joe is certainly not for like what they would be more likely to buy into would be the more right-wing social stuff and left-wing economic stuff, because the average Joe is certainly not going to be riled up by right-wing economics, and that definitely does not favor their self-interest. And
what you're telling me that tax cuts for the corporations isn't going to rile up the popular like electorate? What?
I know it's shocking.
Yeah.
Shocking.
This is one thing. Me when I talk with a former, this is why I don't call myself a Trump supporter anymore, because it's like like the thing that got Donald Trump elected was we wanted, like, what we wanted from Donald Trump was immigration overhaul, an infrastructure spending bill, an America First foreign policy, and like a rewriting of our trade rules. He hasn't really done anything. He's thrown some things, but nothing big. And he's like, guess what? I recognize the the Golden Heights. I got corporate tax cuts, and I passed criminal justice reform. Like, that isn't going to rile up your base. That's because that's the number one rule of politics, is to play to your base. And Trump has just kind of failed on all fronts and he just kind of thinks like, oh well, if I call them all Venezuelan socialists, I'll win the election. Like, that's not going to win you anything.
Yeah, it's actually really amazed me how much Trump really has become, as you say, like an establishment Republican. And in a lot of ways, it's like he's gone out of his way to mirror George W. Bush. So even picking people like John Bolton, who directly were in the Bush administration, and choosing people from Goldman Sachs, and I think he's been just completely absorbed into the traditional Republican Party. And another part of that is that I know that Fox News and Fox and Friends, that has a huge influence on Donald Trump. So I used to, like, if you asked me in 2016, like, what does Trump represent? He was kind of like a break from, I guess you might call it boomer conservatism, or like traditional conservatism.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, so he's now more of like a nationalistic, hard hat, for the people kind of right-wing populist, but he almost immediately just on everything from foreign policy to the economy, even social issues. Because I thought that one thing that I thought was definitely dead and gone forever was the kind of the religious conservatism. So the Mike Huckabee, we need to pander to the evangelicals. I thought that was gone forever. But a few weeks ago, or maybe a few weeks ago, several weeks ago, Trump actually tweeted that he supports public schools teaching the Bible. And so I'm like, so okay, he is just he's now another Bush. He's just President Bush. But
yeah, the one thing in our what we complain about in the right wing is that we've essentially got a Jeb Bush presidency with basically mean tweets. That's what we got. We voted for immigration reform, and we instead got corporate tax cuts. So he's very good for and I guess it's, for me, I mean, I guess I have to man up and kind of say this, but I think everyone was duped by Trump. I don't actually think Trump really has a core. I mean, you could kind of, has a brief, but he's not really. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can't really read Trump. I don't think anyone can, but I feel like he's just kind of, he's just playing off he doesn't have a core thing, and that's why he's like, oh well. Like I mean, the reason why I still kind of would say Trump is a kind of okay is because, at least for me, I know you would disagree with this, but like, okay, he understands that we need to control illegal immigration, and he wants to do that, but he just is so incompetent. He just can't do it. So I think it's like he's like, oh, I want to be sure we're not in all these endless foreign wars, but he's just so incompetent. And his administration is just filled with establishment conservatives, because that's the main problem I think with Trump, is that I think he trusted so much people, that too. And then all the people who are like, he's like putting people in power who like didn't want him elected. They were trying to push for like Marco Rubio and everything, and now they're pushing the same old and I mean, Trump has a lot of power as the president to push things, and like, because Trump's, Trump always tweets like, oh my god, we're, there's this like massive caravan coming. There's so much this and that, and he's like, oh, if only you were president of the United States, you could probably do something, but he just doesn't do anything, which I guess is frustrating, because we just, we're not getting anything, and is essentially when Trump leaves, we're not gonna. Most of his things will be reversed by the next Democratic president, and it'll be like we're in 2016 again, with nothing of, of that we get nothing from it.
So, well, Trump himself is definitely, as you were saying, completely incompetent. He's actually effective in terms of the Republican agenda. So he is not particularly intelligent, at least for a president of the United States. He doesn't really know what he's doing or anything. But I remember there was this very interesting metaphor that somebody made, I think in 2017. They said that if politics were like, we were using like a gaming terminology, Trump was like the tank. So establishment Democrats focus all of their energy on the least important things. So I remember, just for fun, I thought, okay, I'll turn on CNN or MSNBC. And of course, they were talking about the Mueller report, and they were like, oh, well, maybe Barr redacted this, or maybe he was being misleading about that. And then, I go into Fox News, and they're talking about Jussie Smollett. And then there was another nonsense thing they were talking about a few days ago. I don't know what it was, but with CNN and MSNBC, it's like they are just focusing so much on Trump personally, and a lot of people seem to think that if we impeach Trump, then that will solve all of our problems, as if there's something uniquely wrong with Trump. And there is something uniquely wrong with Trump, is that he's a horrible person, he's very incompetent, but in terms of policy, it's not like Mike Pence would be very much better. So it's like, well, let's say that, the Mueller report does, and I don't think it will, but like, let's say that the Mueller report, the full version gets released, and plot twists, there's all this horrible stuff, and then it's so horrible that we all impeach, and then the Senate convicts Trump. Oh, okay, then congratulations, Mike Pence is president, and you've spent years just letting the Republicans get away with manslaughter. I was going to say get away with murder, but with healthcare, they're getting away with manslaughter. So, and I was just absolutely stunned that the Trump administration or the DOJ announced that they want to totally get rid of Obamacare, including protections to pre-existing conditions and all of the other provisions of Obamacare that help so many people. And there was like a few hours, there was like a day where they were talking about it, but like after that they went right back to the Mueller report, and I'm just like, that guy who said that Trump is the tank of the Republican, and everyone attacks Trump while they get their way. For people who don't know, a tank is basically like someone in a video game who the enemy spends all of their effort attacking, while the rest of the team can be like hitting or healing or something. And
okay, that makes sense. I was kind of confused for them, like, I hope I get it. But yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I should have explained what the tank meant.
No, don't worry.
So Trump is basically soaking up all of the energy and political capital that should be going to healthcare and education and infrastructure. But I will say that the Democratic primary candidates are doing a decent job talking about healthcare and everything.
Yeah.
Sorry if I was talking too long, but yes, you are correct that he himself is incompetent. But I would say that he is he's doing a good job being a cog in the machine, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, on the right wing side here, it's kind of the same thing here. It's like Trump. There was this guy. His name is Nick Fuentes. I can't say Irish last names, but he made a good point saying so I was like, oh my God, Trump got it exonerated by by the Mueller report. That's a big win for us. It's like, I mean, is it really? I mean, like what? So Trump doesn't get impeached. Okay, so what? He just raised the amount of H-1B visas that are allowed. I think he's raising it to like 90,000. He's expanding catch and release and sending more. He recently signed a funding bill like a month or two ago, which limited the amount of detention beds for the border protection to use. So now they have to release people into the interior of the country because they don't have enough to hold them. And there's actually this immigration crisis because right now what we're on track to take in 1.5 million illegal immigrants within this year. I think within March it was like almost like I forgot the exact numbers. It was like hundreds of thousands of migrants are going into the border. And the thing with him is that, okay, well, he's just being this incompetent just loser, and he hasn't done anything of that he said he would do. And he's like, oh, he got exonerated. Great job. Oh, he's not a Russian asset. Fine. But doesn't send us anywhere. And it's just people are just talking about like the country has like real problems. And I think you and I agree on that. And it's just no one understands it, and just kind of they just want to talk about like drama, and they just so. I think one way we could steamroll this into the next conversation is kind of like the 2020 thing. So like, what exactly, like, how do you think the 2020 race is going to come along? And like, how do you think what's Trump's chances? Like, how's the Democratic primary? Who do you think is going to win the Democrats? So as a, like, what's your thoughts on that? Like, how do you think the 2020 election is going to come? How's it rolling along?
In terms of the general election, I would say that I am very pessimistic in the sense that I think that, and when I say I'm saying as someone on the left, as a Democrat, I am very pessimistic. So I think that Trump maybe has like generically like a 60 to 65% chance of winning, because I'm seeing all of the Democrats, or at least the Democratic voters, maybe not the candidates necessarily, but fighting over, I guess, purity tests, you could say, and
I think one of the most.
I think one of the
most stupid. Yeah, sorry. Like, I think one of the most stupid things. I've been seeing this on a lot of some Democrats are like, oh, but Bernie Sanders isn't a Democrat. That he can't run for the Democratic Party. I'm like, Jesus Christ, you guys are so dumb. The thing
really
that. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, you're correct. They really are. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
No, sorry. Yeah,
they really are.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's basically Donald. For me, actually, I have kind of a more optimistic view for the Democrats. I think it's the Democrats' race to lose. I mean, I do give Trump a little bit. Like, if I had a bet, I think Donald Trump might win. Considering if you just look at indicators in past elections, we have a strong economy, so quote unquote, I mean, we're not in any sort of, economic recession or anything. I mean, we could say that the underpinnings of our economies are widely wrong, and I agree with you on that. But just in terms of how people perceive things, he's an incumbent, and he's just, and I think with one thing I'll give Trump and is that campaign. What we in the right wing, what we say is that there's a campaign Trump, and then there's President Trump. Campaign Trump is like a populist right character, and he's a very good campaigner. I think you and I agree on that. So I think like we're like saying, okay, Trump is being this absolute buffoon. He's he passed corporate tax cuts, and is that going to like get him elected? But then we realize that he's a very piss poor like person to run the government. But when he campaigns, he's really good because that's where he shines. And obviously, and it also depends on who the Democrats elect as well. I think I agree with you guys on the left on saying that if Sanders wins, especially or if like a left-wing populist wins, they have a much better chance of winning. Especially if Bernie Sanders sticks to his economic populism and doesn't kind of transcend into how do you say doesn't transform into kind of like the culture war and all that, because that's where Trump thrives. And you know, if because I heard there was a quote from Bernie Sanders, and I love Bernie, but he was like Trump, like when you try to convince the American public, so he was like Trump's a racist, he's a sexist, he's a homophobe, he's a transphobe, he's a religious bigot, and he's like you're only playing your own. Like everyone on your side already agrees with that. Someone who's a Trump supporter is like, okay, yeah, we don't care. It's if he doesn't dive into like kind of name calling Trump into like, oh, he's a racist, and just kind of, but if he sticks to like concrete things that helps the American people, I think they'll definitely win. If he doesn't kind of get bogged down in which I actually kind of support. I think I kind of have faith in Bernie because he, you know, he doesn't. I don't think he bought. His bread and butter is economics, and I think, you know, he'll be pretty. If he gets the nomination, he has a very good chance of beating Trump. I'll admit, but it just depends on how Trump, you know, what happens with Trump and kind of what the Democrats bring up.
I think that just in terms of like the cycle of American politics, I think that like you were saying, you know, Trump is the incumbent, and I do think that just in a generic election he would win. But I think that the kind of salvation for the Democrats is going to be, or hopefully would be, demographic changes. So like since Bill Clinton, it's been, you know, 8 years of, you know, Bill Clinton, and then 8 years of Bush, and then 8 years of Obama. It just seems like this
like yo-yo effect.
Yeah, it really is. But I think that what could make it so that Trump loses in 2020 is that essentially every year it's becoming harder and harder for the Republicans, just mathematically, because
Of
Republicans
demographics.
rely on older white people, especially men, but just white people above age 40 usually. Younger people, minorities, their share of the population is just really increasing to the point where it's not impossible that Republicans will still win, but I think that it'll keep becoming harder. So people were saying in 2016, you know, it may be the case that the Republican Party, unless they, even in 2012, they were saying that, you know, the Republican Party needs to seriously reassess themselves, or else they will keep losing. And, you know, Trump barely won in 2016, and really, he lost the popular vote by like 3 million votes.
Yeah.
The only reason that he won was because of a few tens of thousands, like 70,000 votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So I really do think that even if Trump wins in 2020, I think that the Republican Party, just in the long run, is in severe trouble. The counter to that is a lot of tricks that I guess they pull. So various forms of voter suppression. I think that in general, I would say that normally I would give Trump like a 60-65% chance of winning if this were like 10 years ago. But because demographic changes, I'd actually say that flips. So I would say that just any Democrat has like maybe like, except for like, not any Democrat, but like a viable Democrat has like a 60-65% chance. I would say that Klobuchar or okay, so Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren. I like Elizabeth Warren. She's one of my favorites, but I think she'll have a very hard time against Trump.
Yeah, she's very wonky. And I actually love, like, you know, despite of politics, I love it. I absolutely love it when people have like these huge policy ideas. I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. That's a very interesting proposition. I love that. You know, I go like just a week ago, I was or a few weeks ago, I was looking at the Estonian like presidential parties. I'm like, okay, what do they stand for? Because the Estonian election was a few weeks ago. I'm like, oh, where do they stand on the issues? I'm like very entrenched, and I like just for the fact that you put up like a like policies and like what you want to do, just makes me love you so much more. And it's just, I mean, it doesn't matter where side of the aisle, because it's just because that's at the end of the day, it's like, you know, you're voting for people based on, because they're your representatives. You're supposed to, they're trying to push for policies that you want, that'll make your life better, or you think your country's life is going to be make better. But it's not like, oh, he's a very nice person. It's like that doesn't matter. you're voting for policy. That's like what it matters at the end. So I love Warren for that. And I'm like, man, she's like rolling off so much things. And even though I don't really like Warren so much, but she's very wonky, and I love that. But so to your point about I think you and I are in agreement that demographics are gonna. So if you look at American history, there's been these like long periods where there's like Democratic dominance versus Republican dominance, where the Democrats would be in power for like 20 or 30 years, and then the Republicans are going to be, and then Republicans become in power, and it's usually because of some sort of like kind of reaction to something that happens. Like the Reagan Revolution was a response to like I think the '60s kind of like liberal things and like liberal hippie movement, and then kind of like the reason why Democrats were dominant was because of kind of the FDR social programs type thing. And I think what's going to happen is that it's going to be probably happen in the 2020s, maybe after the election after Trump finishes his second term. Texas is going to flip blue, and after that, what's going to trigger is that Republicans are going to go into kind of like, oh shit, what can we do? Because then once Texas flips blue, they can't do anything, and that's the thing where we're talking like on the right wing, we're telling like, hey, like demographics are going to screw everyone over, and or at least screw the party over, and pulling up like a based black man who supports tax cuts isn't gonna like, oh, did he know that the first Republican senator, the first black senator was a Republican? Like no, like that isn't gonna help anyone. Like that's not gonna help the party. People, at least racially, vote kind of vote for their own interests. Like, how does this help me as a group? And the way, if you don't mind it, if I could kind of think about a way the Republican Party is going to handle in a more multiracial America, do you think you don't mind if I give you like kind of like my interpretation of how they might try to get out of that?
Go ahead.
Alrighty. So what I think is what if the Republican Party is going to survive? So what happens in multiracial countries is that what happens is they they pander to certain groups, and the way they have to win is to break the democratic rainbow coalition. So the way to do that, first of all, is what they have to do is become basically a white identitarian workers' party. Trump kind of flirted with that, and that's the reason why he won. If he wasn't, the white working class is going to be the main focus of the GOP. They're going to have to start embracing essentially white identity politics in a way, and that's the only way they're going to win. And after they have this strangle on like kind of more these like kind of their base is these white working class people, they'll expand the definition of white to include white Hispanics. So a lot of people don't know this, but when people think of Hispanics, they think of like Mexicans, because about 50% of our Hispanics are Mexican, which are a mixture. Usually the Mexican people are kind of like mixed, like half. They're like they look like native. They're like half Native American, half European. They're like mestizos. But there's a lot of Hispanics who are just purely white from Europe, who just, they're purely like that. So when they immigrate, if you include them into your broad definition of white, because the thing is that non-Hispanic whites are projected to become a minority by 2045. However, if you include white Hispanics, they actually stay afloat as a majority for a little while longer. The next thing they have to do is kind of use Asians as kind of what they call a model minority. Basically, they're like, okay, these people are very rich, they're very kind of socially conservative, and they are they're not this like underdog class. They kind of come here, they're rich, they're socially conservative, and you could appeal to them. Now, not only are you like a workers' party, you also could attract kind of big business support by framing it like a capitalist versus socialist issue. Like, hey, I'm for capitalism, but these people are for socialism, and you make that dichotomy. You could, as a worker, it's kind of like the right-wing parties in Europe, where they kind of adopt welfare chauvinism, I think it's called, where they're like anti-immigration and all that, but they're also for like welfare programs. And the way you would appeal to the next thing I think they're going to do is use blacks to get pitting against Hispanics. The way they're going to do is like, okay, hey, look, all these immigrants are coming in, and they're going to kind of they're going to take your jobs to the blacks. Like, hey, look, we're trying to make a party for America. They're not going to be like an ethnic nationalist party. They're going to be more like a kind of like for example, it's kind of known that like the Democratic Party is like a party for the black voters, right? Because they're pushing policies for blacks. It'll be kind of that for white people in the future for the Republicans. And I think what they're going to do is, but they're going to try to not use explicitly racial language. They'll use like they'll use this anti-immigration thing to help say, hey, look, we're trying to secure the jobs and be like nativist and try to put, and this includes black people. So if they make it like against blacks and Hispanics, they'll kind of, instead of putting this like kind of rainbow coalition, they'll start kind of fight against each other. So I think that's kind of what they're trying to. I think that's the future. I might be wrong, but I think the thing forward is basically trying to divide up the minority, trying to divvy up the minorities in the Democratic Party, and then try to make the GOP as like a white identitarian party. I think that's where it goes. I mean, I might be wrong. I mean, what do you think the Republican strategy is going to be in the future?
So two things. The first thing is that what you're describing has happened historically to an extent. So, if you go back, I remember there was this this person saying that people only think about race in terms of like the current racial terms, but like if you go back 150 years, it wasn't like people universally thought of themselves as white as we would think of it today. It was like people didn't see Italians or Irishmen or Polish people as white. So, but over time, as if our ideas of race never changed, then the Northwestern Europeans, or like even more strictly Anglo-Saxons, have been a minority in the country for a very long time. But every time that I guess the walls have kind of closed in, what they do is they expand the definition, and so more and more groups are included as the in-group. I don't know if that's going to happen this time, because other racial groups in the 21st century are much prouder, or I should say, like so I don't think it's very likely that I mean, you didn't really say that Asians would think of themselves as white. You said the mono minority, but I think
kind of
that
like
Oh yeah. So I think that it's going to be much harder this time for the definition of white to be expanded, because well, first of all, the gap in physical appearance is also much larger, but also that that there's much more of a distinct identity and pride, I guess. So it's going to be harder. But you do have a point with like the white Hispanics. So I think that it is possible that they could more and more be seen as white. The second thing, your question, what do I think the Republicans, or are you asking what I think the Republicans will do or what they should do?
You could try both.
Okay, so what they should do, you were talking about kind of like the Rainbow Coalition. You are correct that they should be trying to kind of like, I don't think they should do this, but in terms of if they want to win, they should seriously tone down a lot of the more overt Trumpian dog whistling, and they should try to incorporate groups that are significantly less marginalized than they were before. So a lot of gay people, for example, are very wealthy because they have a lot more disposable income because they often don't have children. So a lot of them could theoretically, as we move away from, actually, I'm not even sure about that, because another issue is that any time the Republican Party decides here's something we should do, here's our strategy, the problem is that their base will not necessarily accept that. So the Republican Party said in 2012, hey, we need to be more welcoming to Hispanics, we need to reach out more to women, but that didn't happen because it's not like a matter of central planning. So then Trump came along. They wanted it to be Marco Rubio. They wanted it to be somebody who was more moderate, more charismatic, and somebody who could perhaps bring in more Hispanic votes. But then Trump comes along and says they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and it's like that. I think Ben Shapiro actually had a really good. I don't know why I'm possibly citing Ben Shapiro, but I think Shapiro had a good take on this in like 2016. He said, just in terms of like 4 years from now, maybe you would want Trump to defeat Hillary Clinton, but what Ben was saying was that this will screw over the Republican Party for a generation or two because Trump is going to undermine all of their appeal outside of white Americans. So he was saying, oh, maybe I'd rather have.
Huh? What? Yeah, I'm here. I'm having a call right now. A call. Later, please. Alrighty. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're fine. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Oh, right. So I was saying. Oh, yeah. So Ben Shapiro was kind of saying that. What was I saying? Oh, right. So he was saying that. Sure, maybe I'd rather have Trump as president than Hillary Clinton as president. But if Trump is president, then this is going to set the Republican Party back 10 or 20 years. And I think he's right because if you look at polling data, if you look at polling data, young people especially are completely alienated from the Republican Party now, and the Republican Party is not doing a good job reaching out. If anything, they're becoming more and more closed in. So in terms of what the Republican Party should do versus what they would do, I think there's a gap because the Republican Party can't just say here's what we should do because it comes down to their voters, and their voters are white conservatives. So I don't know if I think that you're correct. It could be 10 or 20 years of Democratic, maybe 12 years of Democratic dominance, or maybe not. Maybe we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah, that's a. Do you think? I guess the question I have is, so as you know, my idea is like people are fundamentally, in unequal and imperfect, and there's need for that. And that's kind of like how human nature is, and we have distinct qualities. And I think you and I might agree is that tribalism is a force that just is natural to humans, and that people kind of like tend to want to be with kind of their own kind of, you could say, kind, and they kind of want to be with their own people, and it's kind of, so in a more multiracial, multicultural, I kind of have this question as someone who is on the left. As America becomes more multiracial and multicultural, do you think just the abstract American identity is enough to hold, these different groups of people together? Because one thing I think, I mean, disagree with me on this if you want, but I think we were never. A lot of people say we were always like this like multiracial country, and I think that's actually not true. We've always had like a dominant white majority, and then there was always like, and there was always like a small black minority, and the purpose throughout American history was trying to incorporate black Americans into like the broader American political project. And then now we have all these different groups from all across the world, and do you think people start like just self-segregating and just kind of creating their own little hubs, and like one idea I had, or not idea I had, but like one thing I saw is that so most Hispanics are like living in the Southwest of the United States, and they're so close to their ethnic homeland that they kind of don't have to they don't have to assimilate so much, because they're like, oh, I could still speak Spanish because everyone here, I'm like right next to my old country. And a person is like, as Hispanics become a dominant thing in the Southwest of the United States, they might want to. They're like, oh, I feel like America is just a we want to secede and become part of Mexico. It's kind of like, I think, what was it, like Reconquistador or something like that, where they feel like they don't feel like they're part of the American project. They just want to, like, we're Hispanic Americans. We're not really Americans. We kind of more identify with our homelands, and then we secede. So do you think I'm kind of pessimistic on that. Like, I don't know. I think humans are just inherently tribal, and America will kind of, I guess, end up like the Austro-Hungarian Empire and then break apart into different pieces. But I mean, are you more optimistic on America's racial future? Do you think, or like how do you view like the future of race relations in America?
I completely disagree with that. So as for I don't think at all that there's going to be this schism or anything. People who come into America, they do want to become a part of America. They want to be seen as Americans. They left Mexico or Central America or South America. They didn't leave to be some sort of like conquering force or something. They left for a better life, and they came to America, and they do want to be seen as full Americans. I don't think there's any chance really that they would want to say, "Oh, hey, let's make this part of Mexico." I don't think there's any chance of that. But
Do you think?
as for, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. Do you think we're assimilating the new immigrants in a good way? Do you think there could be other ways we could help improve to make sure they feel more inclined to think themselves as Americans? Because, like, for example, like Black Americans, they've been here since the beginning a lot, but they still kind of see themselves as kind of distinct from, they're not like they think that themselves as Americans, but like, hey, we're Black Americans with a distinct kind of, we kind of have our own issues for our own communities. And so how do you think that might happen with other racial groups as they come in, or how do you think, which ways do you think or which policies do you think that if you're like, hey, you're optimistic on that they're coming in, they kind of want to be part of America, which policies do you think should be in place to help make sure they feel like they could assimilate? Like, what assimilative policies do you think they should be in place to help make sure they kind of feel themselves as part of the American identity, and they don't kind of identify with more their tribal nature?
So there was a study, I think Three Arrows referenced this, showing that assimilation in Europe happened fastest when the migrating groups coming into Europe were given the most opportunity and were treated the best. So they were given good access to education. They didn't feel marginalized. So you mentioned African Americans in the U.S. So there is a bit of a distinct identity, and there is a kind of pride there, and that is largely because African Americans have been so mistreated for so long that it's kind of forced on them that they feel that way. But if you had like a poll of African Americans, like would you want to secede from the United States and form your own country? I think that more than 90% of them would say no, absolutely not. We're Americans. So well, they do have kind of a double consciousness, I think the term is, where there is that sense of like, well, they're Americans on one hand, but they feel disconnected. That doesn't mean that they want to, at least most, I know that in the 60s and 70s there was a little bit of that, but there really isn't this urge to separate. So what there is an urge is for them to be better represented in culture, media, politics, and to be given more opportunity. So I don't really agree with the idea that the U.S. could break up or fragment. But I will say that with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it's like the only time that could happen is if the minority groups are so alienated and mistreated that they would feel like, okay, it's time for us to not do that anymore. And I don't think that's likely at all. But sorry if I was rambling.
Oh no, don't worry. So yeah, I guess we just kind of come to the thing with what do you think? I guess one thing I want to like chip in is in the terms of like values versus I think this is an interesting conversation I have here about values versus kind of practical. I don't know. Let me explain. So when we talk about values, it's very hard to change someone like your principles, like, or your values, because how do you change that? It's kind of based off just your experiences and all that. And for example, me and you agree that we need single payer universal healthcare because just all the data shows that's the correct thing. However, if let's say you're a constitutional conservative and you're like, well, I just don't think the government should be involved in healthcare. It's just not something I, on principle, I'm against it. So I kind of want your idea on like how do we go about like how does, because that's the fundamental thing. This is why I wanted to be more like a free flow discussion. I kind of wanted to know how I'm trying to think of the word. How do people who have certain fundamental principles? How do we talk with people? Because I think that's the frustration when like, oh, I can't talk with someone on the left or right. Um, how do we? I think it's because we have just values are different. So how do you talk with someone whose values are different? Like, uh, in your opinion?
Oh, quick side note. So we're about an hour in. So I
Oh,
guess do you want to keep going like another half hour or so?
oh
Does that
yeah,
sound good?
sure. Oh, I'm having complete fun. Yes.
Oh yeah, thanks. Me too.
I man,
Um,
wait, it's been an hour already. Jesus. I thought,
yeah,
wow.
it's been an hour. Like this happened with non-compete. Like the conversation just went by so quickly. I was shocked. Yeah. So you mentioned values and how do we? I remember I was having this conversation with this one libertarian about healthcare, and if I do say so myself, I was kind of winning on the this wasn't like a live debate. This was like on Twitter or something, and this wasn't as PoliDice as my personal account. And I was doing pretty well, and then he said, "Oh, okay, so I'm gonna start talking about this in terms of morality." And he was under the impression that oh, if we start talking about morality with healthcare, then I can't possibly justify the idea that you can take money from people and use that to fund some
Yeah,
common
yeah.
system.
That's that.
And
Yeah, that's another. Yeah, yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but that's like another thing. It's like a lot of people are like, oh, taxation is theft, and that's kind of weird because a lot of people who say taxation is theft are like a lot of people who are just these basic boomer conservatives because they think it's like trendy and all that. And then they're like, oh yeah, do you support like any sort of government at all? They're like, well, I think there should be a military. Okay, then you don't believe taxation is theft, and
exactly.
then and
Um,
yeah. So yeah, that's just a side note.
but yeah, so there is this movement among conservatives and libertarians where they're especially for like young, well-off conservatives and libertarians, so like, oh, we need to stop talking about how oh, all this left-wing stuff sounds great in theory, but it's just not practical, and we need to shift the debate. So now we're saying, no, no, what is really immoral is for you to take money from other people. And I really want them to go down that route because they will lose so badly.
Yeah,
They just cannot say, like let's say in 2016, instead of Donald Trump, it was Ted Cruz, and instead of running on the idea that oh these left wing policies are so stupid they can never work, let's say Ted Cruz came out and he was just like it would be so immoral of you to tax these wealthy people and use it to give health care to people. That's theft. That's stealing. I'm just
how
like,
how dare you enslave Ben Shapiro's wife?
oh my god, that was so like I can't, I will never get over that. But yeah, so the reason that politicians like Ted Cruz and any Republican politicians would never do that is that it's stupid. Like you will lose like so badly. If you look at any poll, it's like, oh, should we raise the minimum wage? It's something like 70 to 80% say yes, raise the minimum wage.
Yeah,
And the people who say no, don't raise the minimum wage. It's like, oh, well, if we raise the minimum wage too much, then people will lose their jobs. But if they're like, oh, well, let's change the debate. Now, instead of saying that, we're going to say it would be immoral of you to force an employer to pay their employee. And like, you will lose that debate so hardly because
yeah,
the only people who would go along with that are, I guess you could say like young, well-off libertarian people because anybody who's worked retail or fast food or any job that's below the minimum wage, they're going to hear that and go, "What the fuck?" Like you're talking about how oh it's immoral that you would force this company to pay people a living wage. So I think that Republicans absolutely need to not make it about values. They need to keep. I mean, in terms of if they want to win, I want them to
yeah,
lose. If they want to win, they need to keep talking about how this stuff is so absurd. Actually, you know what? What they really need to do is not talk about economics at all. They need to. I was gonna say so. Republicans win elections when there's some big social scandal. So In
Yeah.
2018, it was the caravan. In 2016, it was for emails. So that's what really helps the Republicans win. I've been rambling for like several minutes. I'm sorry.
No, no worries.
Yeah. So your question. I'm sorry I rambled so much, but your question was about values. What is your question? Like, how do you talk to somebody like that, or how do you politically do that? What was your question?
I guess what I was trying to say is like, people just like, for example, if I because I kind of brought this up after the immigration thing, and you could, I mean, I think we vehemently disagree on like the concept of nations and all that, but like, I kind of believe, like, for example, um, you know, say Denmark. Denmark is a homeland for the Danish people with a unique identity of Danishness in it, with a unique language and culture to it, and that's kind of like where in the human race is a broad, diverse, group, and Denmark as a nation is a place for a certain slice of that diversity to express themselves in self-determination. Now you might be like, well, that's just a value. I just kind of think Denmark should belong to the Danes, and you might be like, well, I just don't disagree. I don't agree with that kind of value. And so like the way would be like, so if you convince me that immigration was, say, a good thing to Denmark, but that even if you convince me on every single point, I might not be able to agree with, like, oh well, we still need mass immigration into Denmark because I just fundamentally disagree with making Denmark into a multicultural society instead of a monolithic society. So I wanted to kind of know, how do you like that, because that's the thing about debate, is just I don't how like, in your opinion, how do you kind of, because people have different values, and just how do we get along with all that?
So with Denmark, when you say keep it Danish, do you mean strictly Danish specifically, or do you mean European?
Well, like, for example, like, it doesn't have to be like 100%. The thing is that I mean, for example, there's like a small German minority, and there's obviously people could work, study, but the idea of turning Denmark into something else, like that isn't like there's a dominant Danish like ethnicity there, is something I would disagree with. I think Denmark is a country for them. Now you can make a distinction between, say, certain country, like, for example, you say, well, the United States is kind of, there's not really an ethnicity based, but it's more like a kind of cultural thing. But I kind of feel like certain countries, there's just there's an ethnic component to their identity. Now that does not mean like they have to be discriminatory. Just that I don't think, how do I say, just I don't think immigration should change the characteristics of it, if you know what I mean.
So I do like how you mentioned the U.S. because when it comes to the U.S., I would not even entertain kind of like the traditionalist nativist thing.
Yeah.
I guess I kind of not agree, but entertain that with a country like Denmark or Germany or France. But
Hmm.
as for um, the idea of like keeping Denmark Danish, that is something that I disagree with. I think that that would actually be kind of like a handicap for them. So Europe has very much benefited from the Schengen area, where uh, anyone who even countries that want nothing to do with the European Union, they join the Schengen area because it is so good for their economies to have this free flow of people coming in and out, um, and so I think that it would really hold back Denmark to say, oh, we need to make it so that um, people aren't coming, or I guess you said like keeping it below 50 or above 50%, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, just make it like there's like it's like kind of like ethnic pluralism. Like there's a dominant kind of Danish ethnicity in Denmark. That's like, that makes sense, right? If you go to Japan, it's Japanese. That's kind of the main dominant ethnicity there. So kind of like in Denmark, it'd be kind of like, a majority would be Danish. And I guess it's kind of like, if I want to make more kind of appeal, is kind of like, for example, I'm a Kurdish nationalist and I'm a Palestinian nationalist, because I believe Kurds deserve their own homeland, and that's like kind of what the Kurdistan. They don't want to be part of Turkey or like kind of Arab Syrians or Iraqis. They kind of want their own state, and that's explicitly like almost an ethnic nationalist thing. Same thing with Palestine. They don't want to be part of like a Israeli Zionist project. They kind of want their own Palestinian state. And then there's also Zionism, which, you know, one of the weird things, like a lot of people, everyone denounces, you know, ethnic nationalism. I think everyone here does, but it's like, they support Israel, which is a explicitly Zionist kind of like, we only allow Jewish people to come in. So it's kind of, there's like a bit of a false kind of equivalent, like just kind of this false thing to it. And I kind of, that's why my main point for values is that I believe in the self-determination of ethnic groups around the world. That means like free Tibet, free Palestine, you know, stuff like that. And I just kind of extend that to, you know, Europeans as well. And I don't think I don't think it's wrong, essentially. I agree people should be able to study. There could be a free flow of studying and kind of like working, but I don't know if I should, like, you know, if I ended up in Copenhagen, I feel, oh man, I feel like I accidentally landed in you know, in another country. You know, it kind of like, I don't know. We, as I said, the values we might disagree on, and you know, and sorry, I'm blabbering. Sorry about that.
You're fine, but yeah. So I do disagree. So what you were saying, like we're gonna disagree on that, and yeah. So, I don't mean for this to be like a condescend. For lack of a better word, it just seems kind of primitive. I don't mean that in like an insult, but like I don't mean that to be insulting or anything, but it does.
Don't worry.
Primitive or like this idea that there needs to be like ethnic enclaves. As for like you mentioned Japan, I really don't care if Japan is majority Japanese or if Russia is majority Russian or
yeah. Well, that's kind of like where I was just trying to make a point, kind of like, hey, our values are kind of different in that regard, and that's why it's kind of like, how do we talk in a way that would be able to be, it's just like, I kind of want to like how, because that's kind of how debates go, because, you know, if someone disagrees with your values, it might be hard to convince them, even if you bring out facts and logic, like, you know, like Ben Shapiro style. Yeah, it's so I just wanted to bring it up as a point. I didn't want to, you know, because I think that might be like our biggest point of disagreement. But so I kind of wanted to shift to the kind of foreign policy. So one thing I kind of wanted to ask you is, so you support, you know, so Tulsi Gabbard is making her big pitch about I think this might be a thing we might agree with more. But so Tulsi Gabbard is kind of pushing like a non-interventionist foreign policy as her main plank. But however, I saw a lot in your videos like, well, I actually disagree with her a little bit. Can you kind of explain kind of what you mean by that?
So I do think that, first of all, I also said that I would much rather have a candidate who is too isolationist versus one who is too hawkish. So I would certainly rather have Tulsi Gabbard than a neocon or a Hillary Clinton type. I would certainly rather have Tulsi Gabbard than that. As for what about that would concern me, I'm not a full-blown foreign policy non-interventionist. I think that there is or should be a role for the United States in various international affairs, and I think especially in terms of multilateralism. So I do want the U.S. to have kind of a supporting role with NATO and some maybe some troops in South Korea. Maybe not troops, but like definitely, actually troops in South Korea with North Korea right there. I do think that there should be some American, but multilateral. I don't think that the U.S. should unilaterally be like, oh, we don't like what this country is doing, so now we're going to topple them. I think that the U.S. should, with other nations, kind of cooperate and help them, and in some cases protect them. So if North Korea invaded South Korea, would Tulsi Gabbard do anything? I hope so. I don't know if she would. Maybe she would. I mean, do you think that if North Korea attacked South? Well, first of all, I mean that's a ridiculous situation. But as ridiculous as that is, if North Korea did attack South Korea, which they wouldn't do, but if they did, do you think that Tulsi Gabbard would help them, or what do you think she would do?
I think in her heart of hearts, she'd be like, she wouldn't want to send like the full might of the American military in. But I think all politicians moderate themselves when they get into office because they're surrounded by people who are just disagree with them. And I think, it's gonna be like kind of like Trump. She'll get in, she'll try to push anti. She'll be more obviously more non-interventionist, but it's kind of like what Kyle said. It's like if you shoot for the stars, you might get the moon. Tulsi might, well, in her heart of hearts, might not want American troops in Asia, but she might, maybe she might scale down from like the few. I mean, I don't know how many troops we have in Korea, but I think I think just due to public support of South Korea and just kind of like and just kind of her administration, just people in government, she'll be pushed to intervene. So I don't think maybe in her heart of hearts, if she had dictatorial powers, I don't think I think she'll be more kind of hesitant. But I think just because she's president, because of the complex structure that is the United States government, she'll join and try to defend South Korea. I actually have a question for you. Do you think, if say Russia invades, say Ukraine or say the Baltic states, do you think we should be like we should militarily intervene? Like, what do you think we should be done with that?
Oh, one more thing I want to say about Tulsi Gabbard. Uh, the part where we're talking about like maybe she's too isolationist. Another huge issue with Tulsi Gabbard is that she is very supportive of drone warfare, and that kills a lot of civilians. And she is very sympathetic towards Hindu nationalists. So it's like in some ways I'm concerned with her being maybe a bit too isolationist in some cases, but in other cases she's a bit too aggressive. But to answer your question about Russia invading, so if they invade the Baltic states, then absolutely we need to immediately send troops because they're members of NATO. So we would definitely, alongside the British, Canadians, French, Germans, we would have to defend the Baltic states with military force. If Russia invaded Ukraine, um, I don't think we should send troops in. I don't think that a full-scale war with Russia would be what anyone wants. But if they just said, "Oh, hey, we're going to just take the eastern half of Ukraine," I definitely think um, that'd be a very tricky situation because if it were say a medium-sized country attacking a smaller-sized country, then definitely we should have a multilateral thing to protect them. But Russia is such a powerful country that I mean, how many Americans would die to save Ukraine?
Yeah, and that's like that's kind of extended to like the Baltic states. Like, we might be honor bound by our treaties to help them out, but a lot of people will be saying, "Well, why should American men die in the wheat fields of, of Estonia?" It's kind of the same thing with it's just I mean, maybe I don't know. I kind of for me, I just feel like it's I don't know. I guess it's just this big conversation about like what's America's role in the world. And for me, the way I see America is that we're this fledgling, and we're kind of like Rome at the kind of at the end. We're just we're this expanded. We're in this Pax Americana, and we're trying to like control the world and like run it, and we're this like over. We're this in debt empire that is falling apart at the seams, and we just kind of don't know. And as more superpowers rise, like China, and I think what's going to happen is that the 21st century is going to be defined by liberal democracy versus, I guess, authoritarian or like autocratic rule, kind of like from China, Russia, and stuff like that. And I think as that's kind of what's going to happen, and it's going to challenge America's kind of, I guess, will be like a new battle, a political ideological battle. But for me, I support Tulsi even if she's very isolationist, because what we need is less involvement and more withdrawing from the troops around the world, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I would much rather have a candidate who is further to the left of me on foreign policy versus somebody who's to the right of me on foreign policy. But then that comes to other issues with Tulsi Gabbard, where she, like I was saying, the drones and the internationalism, but also she voted against taking in Syrian refugees, and there are just a lot of issues where I think she's a bit of a wild card. But overall, she's like I think she's basically tied with Elizabeth Warren for like my second favorite candidate behind Bernie Sanders.
Oh, you're not part of Yang Gang?
I am not part of Yang Gang. I know that a lot of people really like Andrew Yang, but that might be a hot take. Maybe people get mad at me for not being part of Yang Gang.
I'm
But
actually gonna be I'm actually going to be joining. He has a political rally that's coming near me, and next month, next Monday, I'm actually planning on visiting. So hopefully, I might be able to see him. So what? Yeah, for foreign policy, let me get some lightning fast questions here. What do you think was the last? Let me name you a war, and tell me if you think America should have. It was a justified war, and if we were in the beginning of it, we should have got in the first place. So first is the Korean War.
Yeah, the Korean War was good. I will say that a big mistake we made with Korea was we did not make it clear that we would defend South Korea, and so North Korea felt more emboldened to attack. But I do think that the Korean, I think that we did some very bad things in that war, and I think I read something like we killed like 20% of the North Korean population, so that's unacceptable. But just in terms of defending South Korea, the big mistake was that we went too far north and then we triggered China into coming into Korea. So if we had just focused on defending South Korea, that would have been good. So Korean War, good, but we took it too far and brought in China, and then like 50,000 people died. So, or even more Koreans died. But
What
so
about the Vietnam War?
horrible, completely unacceptable. So with Vietnam, the big issue there is that the Vietnamese people didn't want us there at all, and we basically had a dictator in South Vietnam who the South Vietnamese hated, and so many of them joined the Viet Cong, and we were just fighting this war to stop this imaginary domino effect, and then we were using chemical weapons, and so Vietnam is like one of the greatest stains in U.S. history. So the Vietnam War. Go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Weren't we like honor bound? We had a treaty with South Vietnam to defend it from North Vietnam, and that's why we got, or was it we didn't have any sort of treaty obligations and we just kind of went in? Do you
I'm not
know?
sure about treaty obligation. I know that the Paris Peace Accords of 1973. I know that we were supposed to like give them ammunitions and supplies if North Vietnam attacked again, and then we did not do that. But as for even if we were honor bound for Vietnam, it's like um, they didn't want us there. There was no way to there was no way to win the war because it's either permanent occupation, because once we leave, the North Vietnamese just win because even the South Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, they support them. So I think that the Vietnam War was just a complete mistake. Yeah.
And what do you think about the Afghanistan War?
That one I actually think was initially justified. So after 9/11, we found out that Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan and he was getting support from the Taliban. And so we went in there to kill bin Laden. But once bin Laden was dead, we should have left. I don't know why we're still there. Like once we
Yeah,
killed bin Laden, we should have declared victory and gone home.
yeah, we're 100% in agreement with that. I love Kyle, but he's just so like every single thing he kind of encounters, it's like it has to be the Americans can't get involved at all. I mean, I'm kind of more non-interventionist. Yeah, I and in that sense, but I feel like he's just so stuck in like a certain kind of. He has this one. I mean, for me, I think 90% of the time, Americans is not justified or it's not worth American lives. So for one thing, I kind of have a question on is for in on the social ground. So as you know, I consider myself a social moderate. And what I mean by that is that I'm in favor of legalizing drugs or like marijuana more specifically. I'm in favor of decriminalizing sex work. I'm in favor of like kind of like not criminalizing people for doing bad stuff, but at the same time, I think there should be like social mores in there should be societal pressures to dissuade people from like taking drugs and having promiscuous how do you say it, promiscuous that type of like just having sex outside marriage and just having this. I think us being more, I guess pushing. I'm kind of more for like conservative values in that respect, but it shouldn't be forced by the by like the boot of the state. So I was wondering if you think there should be certain like societal kind of mores that kind of dissuade people from uh like say drugs and just kind of promoting like healthy, kind of like, hey, get married, stay married, don't do drugs, stay eat, all that. There's like societal mores. And do you think that those things should be like there should be like kind of like these social pressures in place? And like for me, I would call myself a social anarchist. Like I'm like, do everything you want. But there was a good quote. Someone's like, like libertarians to say, who cares if someone does heroin, has never been around people who've done heroin. And I'm like, yeah, that's because like we're not, the one thing I disagree with libertarianism on, and this might be a hot take here, but like it's not all about the individual. Like we're not a one man individualist island, where our actions affect the broader society. And if we it's there's rules, and like if we just do whatever, that affects everyone around us. It's not just us. It's pretty selfish to think that it's just that affects just us. So I guess just like to my earlier question, like what do you think? Do you think those things should be in place?
So just to be clear, this question is completely separate from policy.
Yeah.
Oh, so just social norms. Um, I am very much a person who doesn't care what people do as long as it's safe and consensual. So I have never done marijuana. I've never shown interest in it. The furthest I've ever done is like red wine or like champagne. I think I did one time.
I have no clue why people like alcohol, to be quite honest. Like I tried it before. I'm like, what the fuck? How do people get addicted to this?
So gross. I don't. It just makes you feel like weird, and I don't like alcohol.
Yeah.
But yes, I personally am not somebody who would do drugs, but if somebody, I've had friends who have like just smoked in front of me, and I don't care. Like they can do what they want. So it's like I guess I'm very personally kind of conservative with that, but it's like I don't judge people for doing that. Now, that being said, I think there are lots of drugs that actually. So, if you don't mind going kind of back to policy, I think
yeah,
that
don't
we
worry.
should. What is it?
Oh, don't worry. Don't worry. Talk what you need.
Yeah. So I do think there should be. They're called sin taxes. So it's basically the idea that we're going to have a 10% tax on cigarettes, for example. And I think that's a good idea because you kind of win either way. So if the cigarette tax makes people stop or reduces cigarette smoking, then that's good. However, if they just keep doing it, well, then you raise tax revenue. So it's kind of like a win-win. But as for social norms, it's kind of weird. It's like I it's kind of like the exact opposite. It's like I actually would support some policies that would discourage certain things, maybe like a small like a sin tax or awareness campaigns to kind of reduce a lot of these drugs. But just in terms of social norm, I mean, yeah, I guess there should be social norms, kind of like reducing that. But
like kind of like if you litter, for example, it's kind of seen like you're looked down upon if you do certain, like we're not gonna be like Singapore and like I don't know, like whip you if you like litter, but there's like kind of societal pressures to be like, hey, look, don't be a drug addicted kind of person, don't be like a like kind of, oh, I have I just kind of kind of pushing, I guess, I mean, in my case, I'd like to see conservative values kind of pushed in like a non-conform, like non by the law, but kind of just kind of push in a broader uh kind of as through societal more. So like, hey, don't, because I would like to see, like a lot of people are like, oh, it's liberating, it's I would like, I mean, like, to be quite honest, like I would like to see a world that where people, save themselves for marriage, and people do get married, and people don't take drugs. And I mean, I guess you could say me and you agree that this is like just our personal kind of where we like to see it. Is just, I think we also agree that it should be enforced by government policy. But I guess the question is like, should there be societal norms? And I think you and I agree on that. uh, One thing also, kind of moving away from social issues, is would you be in favor? What do you think of the argument on for immigration? Is would you support and a more as part of like an immigration and reform thing? Let's be bipartisan. Big galaxy brain here for a second. Would you support a bipartisan? So let's say we're in Congress and we're passing a deal. Would you be in favor of an immigration reform bill that, say, legalizes DACA, but also, for example, has certain more restrictive immigration places, like policies in place to help? Or I guess I should say, do you support the idea? Because like this has been a longstanding policy of a lot of American labor unions, and there's a reason why, like a lot of, for example, Bernie Sanders said that he said open borders is a Koch brothers proposal, and it actually is, because what happens is that all these big tech companies, these big business companies, these rich elites, they really like, they want cheap labor, and they want to be able to hire workers at a lower rate, and they want to be, because when you have a lot of workers, you don't have to compete for the best worker and have to raise your wages naturally. You could just take just the lowest common denominator. And so that's why, for example, a lot of labor unions always supported restricting immigration. Now, we could disagree on like Trump's like way he handles illegal immigration for all that. But would you support, like, say, mandatory e-verify, like maybe biometric screening for visa applicants, or maybe like, maybe restricting, kind of, because we take like 1 million immigrants every year, legal immigrants. Maybe we're reducing that to say 500,000, or sort of like lowering it and kind of pushing for more, kind of like reducing the amount of, like, say, visas, like work visas. So instead of hiring a computer program from, say, India for $60,000, you have to hire an American for $100,000 instead. So would you support kind of like maybe like, say, a pathway for citizenship for, like, say, DACA in exchange for that? Like, where would you support in terms of immigration?
So lots of different questions there. So I
Sorry
guess
about that. I'm a bit dumb on this for a second.
no, 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 don't worry, don't worry. So the first question, would I support a compromise? Uh, to an extent, I mean, it depends on what's being bargained for. So I remember some people were saying, oh, well, would you let Trump build his wall in exchange for this? And it's like, oh, it was literally like, it was like Trump revoked an immigration protection, and then he said, oh, if you let me build the wall, then I'll undo that thing I just did. So, so to even entertain something as ridiculous as the wall, there would have to be like massive concessions on how we treat. But if you teach me like the general principle of, am I willing to trade some immigration things? Yeah, because I think that the dreamers and a lot of people who are living here and have families, it is extremely important that we protect them and make sure that they're not deported. So, like, would I trade that for e-verify? Sure. Another thing you asked, do I want to reduce legal immigration? No, no, because bringing high school immigrants into the economy is just a complete win-win. It leads to massive increases in economic productivity. It allows for innovation and entrepreneurship. I think that we should be going out of our way to bring in the best and brightest. If anything, I would want to increase the H-1B visa. Um,
But do you think
uh,
maybe that for corporations, do you think they should have to? Don't you think it's a bit unfair for American workers to have to compete with, say, more lower, or like, for, say, as I said, like, say, with computer programmers or doctors, and these people who just got they have, do you think it's a bit do you think we should try to have corporations hire them first, and or focus on like hiring American high skilled port workers before we give them the thumbs up to just hire foreign workers at a lower price?
I mean, if it really came down to that, then yeah, I guess you would prefer that they hire American workers. But as I understand it, the way that the H-1B visa works is that we ask what are the kinds of jobs where we need more people. So, for example, in STEM, the reason that we have so many H-1B visa workers coming in who are in STEM fields is that that's what we want. We want more people coming in who are STEM. There's a huge demand for computer scientists and software engineers and computer engineers, mechanical engineers, aerospace engineers. So to answer your question, yes, if there was some sort of shortage and Americans with computer science degrees were having a hard time getting jobs, then sure, I guess we could then decrease the number of H-1B visas given out. But that's not where we are. We're actually in a case where if anything, we want to bring in more scientists and engineers. Another thing, scientists. Um, I think that if we're talking about like investing more in scientific research, I think we should bring in a lot more scientists and experts in those fields to do research in the U.S. And then we should put a lot more money into R&D. But so yeah, to TLDR my rambling.
No worries.
Yeah. What?
Oh, don't worry. Don't worry. Keep on going.
Oh yeah, so yeah, I would have it. So basically, the way it is, so the way that the H-1B visa works is that we bring in what we are demanding, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
works well. So no, in the current situation, I would not support reducing that. But if
Would you? Oh, sorry.
oh,
Would you reform? Be part like say for example, instead of would you reform our immigration system to attract more high skilled immigrants than say low skilled immigrants? For example, that would mean like kind of getting rid of the diversity visa lottery and maybe reducing chain migration and instead kind of promoting kind of like a points based system, kind of like how they have it in Australia. Um, and also, do you think that immigrants have and also a question is also sorry for another one, but do you think immigrants have a duty? Do you think English should be the national language of the United States, and that when immigrants immigrate, because like if, for example, when I was a Bernie Sanders style social democrat, I was amazed by the Scandinavian countries, and literally I was like, okay, I want to immigrate to Finland, for some reason. But what you have to do to immigrate to Finland, say you have to have a basic or like a decent, or I think it was like intermediate proficiency in Finnish. So do you think that immigrants who move here should have to pass like an English test and maybe like a basic civics and like history test and all that for when they immigrate here? As long they might have the best skills, but do you think they should also have to know like say English and kind of like a basic understanding of our country to come in as well?
so the first question: should we prioritize high skilled immigrants over low skilled immigrants? I think that I mean, if we had to choose, then yes, I think there's plenty of room in the country for both. But as for chain migration and the diversity visas, I don't have a problem with any of those things. But I think that if we were coming up with some sort of deal where we have protections for the people who I think that when it comes to low skilled immigrants, it should really be about need. So if we're going to take people with low skills, we should take in the people who are most desperate. So people who are coming up from Central America, I think there was like this study that it was like more dangerous to be in Guatemala than in some war-torn countries, just because of how much violence and first thing, end the drug war. Ending the drug war will
Yeah, I
reduce a lot of.
agree.
But yeah, so I think that if we had to choose between high skill, most skill, high skill, but I'm fine with bringing in both. But if there was some sort of compromise with Republicans to increase protections for immigrants, then maybe that could be something as a bargaining chip. Um, your second question: should English be the official language? I mean, it depends, and also you were mentioning in terms of a citizenship test. I think that we already do that. We already have citizenship tests where you have to answer questions about U.S. history and government, and the test is given in English. So I think we already have that. Or are you just talking about not citizenship but green cards, or is that or these or diversity? Is that what you mean?
Or like, I mean, I guess that's actually true, but like, I mean, like, do you think they should be like more stricter, kind of like more a bit better understanding than just a simple test, or do you think there should also, or do you think it's good the way it is? And in terms of English, like, well, yeah, you have to kind of know a little bit of English, but do you think there should actually be like an English like class that like, hey, you need to be able to speak English in order to, at least an intermediate level to come in, kind of like for example, in like Germany, they're trying to, if you want to get German citizenship, you have to learn German, if I remember correctly, and before you could immigrate. Like, you have to like take some government tests, and I'll be more than willing to support like government funded like free language courses for like kind of new immigrants. But I just think I think it's a good way to, because if we speak a common tongue, I think it's a, like as we mentioned earlier, that's a good way for all of us to kind of unite as under the American banner.
So I don't know exactly to what extent English is imposed on immigrants. If you're talking about offering them language learning courses, yeah, sure, I would support giving them free language courses. What concerns me is the idea that the English as an official language could be used as a way to make immigration harder, uh, or as an excuse to keep people out.
I think. Sorry.
What?
Oh, sorry. I think to your point, actually, so you said you want the most people who are the most desperate, the most kind of high skill, the most who want citizenship the most to become part of the United States. I think us having strict kind of civics tests and English tests will kind of weed out the people who just want citizenship because they just, oh, having an American passport is a cool thing to have. And also, it will actually give us the most people who just really actually want to get the American citizenship. Hey, I'm gonna haul ass. I'm gonna learn English. I'm gonna learn about the country and culture. And I'm gonna, and I think that that will give us more high quality immigrants. In that, if I remember correctly, you were like, this is like what we need the most, people who want it the most.
So, in terms of the people who are most desperate, I would say the caravan people from Central America, people from the Middle East, people who are really desperate. I would say bring them in immediately, and if once they're here, you want to help them integrate into the country and help them learn English and help them learn about the country. Yeah, sure, I would support that, but I just don't want that to be used as like an excuse to keep them out if they need to.
Okay.
By
Yeah.
the way, so we're well past the hour and a half point. So
Oh,
do you want to ask any like uh, wrapping up questions or
yeah. Okay.
final?
So yeah. So I have two kind of weird questions. That kind of just kind of, I was saving these for the end, but yeah. So I surprisingly got through everything I want. I kind of like wrote a bunch of topics. We basically went through most of it. So I have two questions, and they're kind of they're kind of like these weird questions. So first is, so what is your perfect type of government? Like, if you were the dictator of the country, what is your like underlying I'm gonna go big philosophy on you, but like sorry for this, for making me at the very end, but like, what is your like underlying philosophy of government and its like relationship with the individual? Like, what's the relationship between the individual and society, and what should we push for in the kind of future? So like, what type of, sorry if I is my mangled words. I typed this all out and I was kind of being weird here. But and then the second question is, what is an opinion or that you have that you think 90% of people would disagree with you on, that it's just like the most unpopular thing, idea you have. So those are the two ending questions.
So for the first question, do you mean system of government, as in like voting system and system of government, or do you mean like ideology, or both?
Yeah, both. And then like, what's the relationship with like the citizens and its country, and or the individual and society?
So in terms of system of government, I think that it has to be proportional. So I'm actually warming up to the idea of like a parliamentary type system where you have a popular vote, and based on proportional representation, seats are allocated based on that, and then you can have like all these different political parties, and then they can form coalitions, and um, so I think that would be excellent. And in terms of if we do have a separate executive, like in a current like Republican system, then you would need to have a runoff election. So in France, they had like 5 major candidates. The two who got the most votes have their own separate election. As for ideology, role of government, and everything, I think that the government should do whatever it can do better than the private sectors. So, for example, some people would say even if universal health care is something that would work well, I don't think that's a legitimate role of government. I don't really think there is a quote legitimate. I think it's kind of arbitrary. So if the government can do healthcare better, then do that. If it can do education better, then do that. I think that there should be lots of things where you have both public and private options. I think that freedom of speech is like the government should not be able to tell you unless you're like harassing people or threatening people, the obvious stuff. And obviously everyone should have equal rights. Democracy and voting rights should be extremely important things. Was that a sufficient answer, or is there something I'm leaving out? Or
no, that was not sufficient. No, I'm kidding. It was good. Yeah, no, sorry, that was good. Yeah, and that's kind of so. In terms of like, so for me, I'm kind of in terms of like, I guess just kind of briefly here, but for me, I'm an economic social democrat. And the thing, I think you and I agree that this is like where I think me and you kind of just thrive together. It's just I think we both agree so much on the economic portion. But for me, I'm totally opposed to democratic socialism, and I'm just very pissed that a lot of people are calling themselves democratic socialists, and they're not actually that. And a lot of people are like, oh, and one thing, here's something that grinds my gears is that people say, oh, I'm in favor of socialism and capitalism, and people don't realize that they're these diametrically opposed systems. And for example, if we're a capitalist country, if we have private property, there's competition, there's free enterprise, there's generally free trade, and there's these fundamental pillars. And I just fundamentally agree that there should be rich and poor people, that there's private sector things, but I also believe that as part of the social contract, that the individual parts in government, they pay taxes and then they get benefits in return. That's just part of that's kind of my opinion. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Like yeah. Sorry for a minute. But like, I guess to clear it, you support like a capitalist basis. Like, there's it's a market economy, but there's government services in place to help for basic things.
Yeah. So a capitalist economy that is regulated capitalism and has strong social programs, universal health care, free college, K through 12, and an emphasis on equal opportunity and a strong safety net. Yes.
Hell yeah, brother. And then the last question for the night before we have the ending remarks is what is the most controversial opinion you have? Like 90% of people would disagree with you on. Like the most controversial thing.
I think that Prisoner of Azkaban is the least good Harry Potter movie.
Oh, that's a bit of a. I don't even. Well, that damn. Well, I can't be friends with you anymore. I'm kidding. There is I don't mind to poke fun at the left wing here. There was a story about a bunch of in Poland, a bunch of Catholic priests burned a bunch of Harry Potter books, and someone's like, "What will the left wing read now in Poland?" I found that pretty funny, but I like the yeah, that's a bit reaching. Very controversial, if I say so myself.
Yeah.
How about what about in terms of like, well, do you want to hear my controversial opinion?
Go ahead.
Okay, so
actually, wait, I'm not. I mean, go ahead, but yeah, it should go ahead. Go ahead.
you're already a bit reserved on this. Okay, I wonder if I want to give you my second most controversial opinion or my most controversial opinion. I don't.
Let's go with
the second most controversial or the most one?
The second most controversial.
Okay. I think democracy we care too much about democracy. I think this push for kind of democratizing everything, like everything has to be by the will of the people. I think that's sometimes like I admit, like even in an autocratic system, you should always gouge like what your people want, but like everything, nothing, not everything has to conform to the public will. Certain things should be done given to like the technocracy and the kind of bureaucracy to deal things out, even if the majority of people disagree with it. I mean, democracy is good and like it's kind of in some sense, but I think this push for like democracy is an inherent good in everything we do is a bit overrated. So that's
so. I think that what you may mean is that you don't support direct democracy or pure democracy. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I don't agree with that as well, but I think there's also like, oh, everything has to conform to like what like we have to always gouge what the people want is a bit like sometimes it's just coming. But yeah, like I'm against direct democracy, but also just kind of everything has to be kind of this. I guess the idea of democracy itself just kind of it, it shouldn't be like 100% all the time kind of followed, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. When I think of making things more democratic, I guess obviously I support representative democracy rather than direct democracy. But when I want to make things more democratic, what I mean is I want to make the voting system and election system more proportional and more transparent. And so like ranked choice voting and proportional representation and runoff elections. And I think that voting should be easier and more people should like it should be much harder to prevent people from voting and to take the right to vote away. I think that so if you just mean direct democracy is unstable and flawed, I agree, but I think that democracy in general should be safeguarded to the highest extent in a
Yeah,
representative
yeah,
fashion.
in a weird way, I actually agree with you on almost all points. I was having a debate with my dad, and my dad. Okay, let me tell me. I don't think you've ever heard this before. So I was talking about how we need ranked choice voting, and he said that violated the fundamental principle of one man, one vote. Just let that sink in for a second. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm like,
Well, no, it's still one vote. The vote just changes circumstantially. So I get what he's kind of. I think what he means to say is that you should just vote, and then that's your vote. That's your opinion. But that's really silly. I mean, it's like because if you still only have one, so let's say it's the French election and you have the 5 different candidates. Your first choice is the center left candidate. Your second choice is the far left candidate, and then your third choice is Macron. So let's say your first choice is the center left one. He gets eliminated. Then the far left one gets eliminated, and then your third choice is Macron. You still only got one vote. You didn't get a vote 3 times.
yeah. Oh, that
Uh,
makes sense. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That actually makes
but
sense.
yeah,
Yeah. You just owed
yeah.
me
So,
with facts and logic.
no. It's a. No, I mean, that wasn't even that was your dad's opinion.
No,
But
no, no. I'm joshing. Um, yeah. So, oh, man, that we went through everything. Man, I was actually coming into this like I was having this massive anxiety kind of. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna fuck things up. Everything's gonna fuck up, and we're probably gonna like be mumbling around in like a stupor and all that. But we actually had a really great I really loved this conversation. Thank you so much. Do you do you have any like questions for me before we get into like the final statements and or have how did you think the debate or not the debate just kind of did you like the discussion? Like how did I do as a first time amateur person?
yeah, it was really good. I was also extremely nervous when I had my first with non-compete. I was extremely nervous about that because it's like, oh, what if my internet goes out? And I remember we actually had to do a few test calls. The debate was between me and non-compete, and Sean Matthew King was the moderator. Sean and we did like 2 or 3 test calls, and at first it wasn't even working because it's like I couldn't figure out how to make Google Hangouts allow access to webcam without blocking it because it's like what I ended up having to do was that you give it access to the webcam, but I have like cards like taped to the camera.
Oh my god. Sorry, when I watched what was it? Black Mirror, there was this do you know what Black Mirror is? The British
Yeah,
kind of there was this one where this guy gets caught like masturbating by this like from his kind of thing, and after that I have this like this My Little Pony like rarity card that I somehow found, and like I taped it over my like fucking camera. I'm like, oh god. So yeah,
oh,
I know where you're coming from.
yeah, and so just in general with live debates in general, that's definitely it was definitely a transition for me, and so we had 2 weeks to get everything figured out, and then we made up. So I totally get where the nervousness comes from, and yeah. So I'm glad that you enjoyed this conversation. Actually, one question I do have for you before we wrap things up, what
Mhm.
would you say is like the future of your channel? Like, because I know that you only recently went back into making videos.
Yeah. Oh man. So that's the biggest question of the debate. I'm kidding. Yeah. So the way I see, I kind of want to. I mean, the thing as we saw, YouTube is is just very you think one video is going to make it big and it doesn't, and then this one random ass video you make it just it explodes. Um, and so it's fun. It's very uncertain on what's going to happen. But what I'm trying to go for is more like a political channel and kind of like what you like. I kind of because I've always okay, maybe this is just how do you say it? A very selfish of or not selfish, just kind of just like very like oh I want to give my opinion on the internet, but it's like I guess instead of me giving opinions, I kind of want to use you kind of like say hey kind of give maybe a unique perspective if I have any kind of put kind of maybe do some debunking, maybe kind of explain some stuff. I'm actually right now working on all the 2020 Democratic presidential candidates, and also another video I've planned is called the Policy Awards. Basically, I give grades to like medals, virtual medals. I don't have any medals in real life, but virtual medals to kind of candidates with the best, most unique policy perspectives, like with that are policy focused, that have like, their own unique perspectives, and I give them like good grades, and I kind of like these policy awards. So I have those two videos that are planned. And I kind of have I have a discussion with a girl from Sweden. She's on the right, so like I kind of talk to you, or you're on the left, and she's on the right. And she kind of, and so I have I'm in the talks with her to have a discussion as well. So I kind of want to have some discussion, some basic political channels, but also, I also want to do some gaming, and I want to have like a wide variety of content on my channel. And hopefully something happens. I mean, it's a big, before I just uploaded like music and I mean, not, just kind of like, non, hey, this music's cool. And then now I'm making politics and everyone who subscribed to me, like, what the fuck? What are you doing? So it's kind of, I need to get the, a new audience and all that. And hopefully that's kind of where I'm hoping and I hope to kind of grow and kind of get all these people to I guess kind of put unique perspective out there, but also get people from across the aisle and come together and kind of say, hey, it's possible to let's fix the problems that we see with this country, and I really want to make a better future for everyone that and everyone has a unique perspective because I've been all over the political spectrum as I described, and I know everyone has a unique way of looking at things, and I think it's imperative to kind of look at reach across the aisle and and see what the other people have to say. So that's kind of what I hope for my channel.
Yeah. So thank you for having me on. This discussion it went on technically a bit too long, but it was a great discussion. So thank you for having me on. I hope everything goes well with your channel, and I hope that this video turns out okay. I'm worried that like I'll try watching it and then like it like doesn't work or something. I don't know.
Oh god, imagine like we stopped the broadcast and it hasn't actually been broadcasting this entire time.
That would be hilarious. It would be very disappointing. It would be hilarious, but I hope that that does not
Yeah,
happen. But
let's cross our fingers. Yeah, well, yeah, thank you so much. It's a great honor to have you. It's a, I might be kissing your feet too much, but like, I mean, I really, yeah, just thank you so much for coming on, just having this. And I think it's a triumph to show like, hey, like I'm a, a very concerned, I mean, I think, I mean, just because you're this like, this, on the right, they're like, oh, he's just this Bernie Sanders style, so, left wing person who's, for feminism and kind of for my, like Black Lives Matter. And you're the, you're this guy who's this, this immigration restrictionist, like nationalist. And yet we were able to have this discussion and just be able to like shoot the shit, have some, just have a free flow discussion. And I think that's just a triumph to say that, hey, we could actually get along. And I really appreciate, despite me being very on, you could say on the far right or whatever, but, I'm very, I want to congratulate you to help, talking with me. And it was a really great time. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
You too.
Yeah, and before, just one more, sorry, but just for feedback, for the ending, do you think I did? I guess you already answered, but do you think I did a good job, just moderating it, or not moderating, just kind of giving you a good time for this discussion?
Yeah, it was a good time. Thank you.
Alrighty, well, sweet. So, yeah, aim high, wander on from America with Russian love. Alrighty, let me end the broadcast.